And here we're gonna take that conversation a step forward. We're gonna talk about how to grow, how to build carbon removal markets, and we've got the best people on the planet here to talk about that and discuss that. So if you're here, if you're listening in, if you're an entrepreneur already invested in this space, you're working on starting a company, maybe you're working at a large corporation interested in maybe supporting carbon removal or buying carbon removal credits as part of your sustainability plan. Maybe you're an investor, you're seeing this area heat up and you want to be part of it. You're in the right place. If you're maybe learning about carbon removal, you've been digging through Google and digging up reports, this is a great place to dive in. And if you want to take your knowledge further, we do have the Air Miners Boot Up, which is a 5-week course where people that are interested in working on carbon removal can meet other people and learn about the whole industry that's coming to life. So welcome everybody that's here. We've got a Q&A tab if you have questions as we go, and it does have an upvote thing. So if you go through and look at that and upvote stuff, we can pull in some questions at the end. And with that, we are here with these incredible panelists. We've got Liz from Microsoft, Shuchi from the Department of Energy, and Julio from the University of Columbia, who's also part of the Carbon Direct team. And we're here to talk about the need for carbon removal markets and taking that a step further into how do we build these markets, how do we grow these markets. To kick us off, Liz has some introductory remarks about the work that Microsoft has been doing, and then we're going to dive into discussing. So take it away, Liz.
Fantastic. Thanks everyone so much. This is a great panel and a great topic. So I will share my screen. Can you all see it? Not yet?
Not yet.
Oh, okay. Hold that thought, please. All right, here we go. Any luck now?
There you go.
All right, great. So really, as a data science company at our origin, in our DNA, we're really focused on what science tells us to do. We always have been, always will be. And so back in late 2019, when we were first creating our carbon negative commitment that we announced in January 2020, our Chief Environmental Officer, Lucas Joppa, said to our team, our whole team, hey, I want you to know the IPCC report on 1.5 degrees backwards and forwards. And I especially want you to understand what they say about removals and how we might get to net zero. And so we did that deep dive. And what it tells us, what the science and what the IPCC tells us, is that carbon removal is crucial to keep global temperature rise within 1.5 degrees, and that we need tens of gigatons in the coming decades. We also need, in order to do that, we can conclude we also need all removal types, because currently nature-based solutions, direct air capture, other engineered solutions simply aren't enough on their own to have an either or proposition. We need all of the above. And with project development timelines of a minimum of 4 years and looking upwards of 10 years, we need to begin contracting now for those projects. And we need to have that firm demand signal for plants to be built, for projects to be built and planted. And we need to have both quality in the market that corporate buyers like ourselves and corporate investors like ourselves can procure and invest. But we also need, what the market also needs is money on the table. And so we're currently in this very nascent chicken or egg state that we need to break through in order to scale this relatively small market to the tens of gigatons that are needed. And so with this discussion today, I'm really glad to have Julio and Shuchi and Tito on the line to really talk through what are the ingredients for scaling this market up, what are the preconditions, what are the necessities, and what are the pathways. And so building on the great panel that we had previously at 11 a.m. Pacific time, the prior panel, which really looked at some of the landscape as it is today. What I think we'd like to do in this next bit of time here is really look at what needs to be to make the world closer to what we need for a net zero a net zero future. And so I'm going to keep it brief with that, but look forward to talking more. And I'm going to hand it back over to you, Tito.
Excellent. Well said, Liz. Yeah, so that brings up this question, right? How do we get there? We need the market to be bigger. It's probably good to define what that is, but it's on the order of 100 times, 1,000 times bigger. I'd love to hear from probably everybody here. What's missing? What do we need to? What's missing in order for us to get there? Why aren't we there already? Maybe Julio, kick us off.
Happy to. Thank you. And thank you for having me. And thanks to Verge, as well as to Microsoft for hosting this event. Let's start by one of the things that we need a common definition of carbon removal. A lot of people are confused by what we mean by that. People often confuse avoided emissions with reduced emissions with removed emissions. And they all have their place to get to net zero, but they're really not the same thing. So far, mostly what the market has trafficked in has been other stuff. It's been actually either avoided emissions or abatement through carbon reduction. We need to actually clearly identify what is CO2 removal, and by that we mean taking carbon dioxide out of the air and oceans and binding it into durable form, however that is. This gets to a sort of another aspect of it. Right now, the market as it is predominantly a voluntary market. Companies like Microsoft are leading the charge. More companies are coming forward and making net zero commitments that by definition requires some CO2 removal. And as people are getting into that space, we're seeing the voluntary market grow. But ultimately, if we're going to get to a multi-gigaton scale, I don't think the voluntary market will deliver that on our own. We need to have increasing access to compliance markets. Today, the low carbon fuel standard is one thing that qualifies as a compliance market, which recognizes direct air capture. Other states are following suit, but not all CO2 removal approaches are recognized. Not all CO2 removal options are functional within a compliance market. And there is no SEC equivalent. There is no Securities and Exchange Commission on carbon, so there's nobody watching the store. We have to build the plane as we fly it. That's complicated, but you know, we start where we start and we move as we move.
All right, that's our first vote for the. Oh yeah, Shuchi, what do you think?
Oh, so no, I'd love to build off of what Julio said. You know, it's having that common definition, but also just building the knowledge of what carbon removal is just across the country and the world. I think we've seen really exponential growth there in the last few years, but really having communities understand the opportunities that carbon removal can bring, you know, to them, whether that's jobs or environmental pollution mitigation. There is such a, you know, lack of understanding what different carbon removal approaches are, the different aspects they have, and, you know, the opportunities they bring. And I think that's something that, you know, this administration is really keen to change.
And Tito, I would chime in to say that what we need as a corporate buyer is affordable quality volume. And if that comes to the market, we will buy it. So just simple as that. Others will buy it too. The market is heating up, and right now it's pretty volume constrained for quality tons.
That's right. I really like the specificity you have there. One of the things that we have the benefit of is we're not starting from zero, right? There is a emerging carbon removal credits market. There is some volume, there is some that's affordable, there's some that's quality. Could you talk a bit about, when you're thinking about the progress that we're making on carbon removal, Liz, what's something that you've seen, you know, in the last 6 months or last year that you find really encouraging in terms of getting us to affordable, quality, high volume?
Well, it's a good news, bad news scenario because as an early corporate buyer, we knew that we wanted to share our homework and share our lessons learned so we could elevate market intelligence for everyone in pursuit of this common goal that we have of saving the planet, or saving life as we know it on the planet. And so in doing so, we were excited to have a ripple effect of influencing others to get excited about high quality carbon removal. Now we're seeing the market is really heating up. And so the bad news scenario is from a more narrow-minded standpoint. As a buyer, we're now facing a really tight seller's market. And so we're living the dream right now, living the dream of having a ripple effect, but also having some challenges actually executing on our volume proposition.
Mm-hmm.
Can you get specific? Like, is there any examples you can share of what does that mean that the market's getting really tight?
Yeah, so last year we issued our first request for proposals around this time last year, and we expected to get maybe 40 proposals. We ended up getting 189. We got proposals for 55 million tons, but to Julio's point, many of those proposals, while really well-intentioned and thoughtful, were not really actually about carbon removal. They were about avoided emissions, reduced emissions, and so on. And so which by the way, really important, we need to avoid and reduce emissions, but we're focused on removal. And what we ended up finding was that after we qualified all the tons and diligenced all the tons, about 2 million of that 55 million were actually qualified according to our criteria. And that was just last year when we were the first early mover on the market, one of the first early big movers on the market. And so since then, a lot of other buyers have waded into the market, and we just released our second RFP a couple weeks ago. We're concerned about whether or not we're going to make the volume. So to be really blunt. Right.
And let me build off that, if I may. Carbon Direct was really pleased to be part of that whole process. And our founder, Jonathan Goldberg, says, well, apart from the fact that there's no supply, there's no demand, there's no regulation, and no transparency, the market's perfect, right? And that's basically where we are. In order to get the tons out there, in order to get the volume, it takes time. You have to actually build plants, you have to build projects, you have to plant forests and manage them for a long time. There's all of this stuff that needs to be done, and just putting more tons on the board is difficult. Tito, to your earlier question, the biggest direct air capture plant in the world is about to commission. It's going to commission in Iceland in a month, the new Orca plant. It is 5,000 tons. So it's about a factor of 1,000 too small for Microsoft. And that did not build from zero quickly. Like, it took some time to get these things going. Even if we get a couple of megaton plants up, by the time that they are up, it is likely that we will have on the order of tens to hundreds of millions of tons of demand for really quality CO2 reduction and removal. And we need to go about that. What I will add as a final thought, an important component of this, we keep saying quality removal, quality projects. In order to help clarify what is meant by that, Carbon Direct worked with Microsoft and actually put together a set of practices and said, if you're going to build projects, this is what they should look like. This is the minimum threshold. This is best in class. And that provides, I think, a sense. The governments of the world have not yet created standards by which you can demonstrate that something is quality. And even though Mark Carney's task force is busily pulling a bunch of thoughts and people together and making progress, they're really focused on the sort of the contracting and the transparency elements. The quality element is still one which requires a broader effort across the entire ecosystem.
Brilliant. I think somebody's going to probably dig up that report and post a link. I'm sure we have some people watching, but yeah, that sounds like really good information. Who do you think is who should go out and read that report this week?
If you're referring to the report, that the ideal project criteria, project developers, brokers, other corporate buyers, I would even say government officials and standards bodies as well. I mean, we're not trying to create a new standard. We know that they're existing, at least Microsoft, we know that there are existing standards already. We applaud the work they've done to date, but with a lot of room for improvement on carbon removal in particular. And hopefully this type of contribution that we've made with Carbon Direct can help to influence that.
Excellent. I will add one more thing to that, which is that the certifiers and qualifiers that are out there, the Veras and the gold standards, they have a set of protocols that have been working on for a long time. We applaud their efforts. We also applaud the fact that they are updating those protocols, and they're trying to improve them in order to provide higher quality to more people. Like, that's all good. We're very pleased about that. It is still not quite the case that there's full agreement on what those are, that all buyers will agree with the qualification of standards and stuff. So it's going to take a few years for this to kick out. And having a taxonomy like we have in the United Kingdom or the EU is a great start, but it's not the end of the work. It's just the beginning.
I love it. And to that point about beginning, Shuchi, we were talking yesterday about this opportunity Can you speak more to that? I mean, there's so much ahead. What's your read on this?
Sure. I mean, I think there's a huge opportunity here to build quality carbon removal, and I think government has such a key role in doing so, and I think we're behind, right? And I think we need to take the lessons that Julio and Liz have so carefully crafted and really start thinking about how to apply them. And that means really creating robust carbon accounting measures that can be applied to these larger markets that we want to create. I think another key piece that we haven't talked about yet too is when we say quality, I think we also mean equitable and just. And so ensuring that we are doing and building out projects properly and well and is just such an incredibly important part of this conversation. And so I think we at DOE and the administration have a huge opportunity to create an industry that is equitable and just from the start. And so when we ask what it takes to build a quality carbon removal market, I think that's an embedded part of that question that we're just starting to focus on and really start to understand what that means. And so when we're thinking about all these new funds that we might get from the infrastructure package, it's incredibly exciting to know that the government's starting to make these really key investments that only governments can make. But we also have the opportunity to spend that money in a way that brings communities to the forefront of decision making, because that's not how we've done these kinds of projects before. And so I think we have this amazing opportunity that I really want to make sure that we capitalize on, and that we leverage the power we have here for this industry that is going to be so huge at the start.
Can you dive in a bit on in terms of just a bit of detail about kind of the application process, or how are you thinking about this actually coming up in your own work?
In terms of how industries will apply to government funds?
In terms of bringing equity to new projects that are creating it, and your role as a catalyst.
Yeah, no, I think when we think about something like a demonstration project, thinking really carefully about where we site and how we make decisions about where to site is incredibly important. And so really going on the ground to different potential communities to talk about what they think about CDR, what their concerns are, and how we can help either assuage their concerns or how we can talk about the different factors that are going into our decision-making process. I think going in without assuming decisions and really co-working with communities is something the government can absolutely do. It requires creating a new framework for how we make those decisions and how we choose projects. But we are ready to do that, and we're excited to do that. It's a lot of work, but transformational change is always a lot of work.
And Tito, I'd love to piggyback on that. So appreciative that environmental justice is a real deep focus of this conversation and others over the course of the day. I think for us, in the ideal project criteria that we published with Carbon Direct, we have a section specifically focused on the sort of musts and shoulds, both the minimum bar and then the aspirational bar for all the criteria, but especially for environmental and climate justice, and really welcome feedback on that count from all project developers and other stakeholders. I would also really strongly encourage anyone who's interested in this topic, and even anyone who's not really interested in this topic, maybe especially you, to check out the work of Carbon 180 and also Climate Works, both of which have really been leaning into this space and doing some really important work to build bridges across, frankly, communities, environmental justice community and the carbon removal community, which haven't really always been on the same page. So I think there's some bridge building work that needs to happen, and those are a couple of the organizations that are doing some really exciting stuff on that count.
And really quickly to piggyback off of that, coming from Carbon 180, I totally agree. I love the work that the organization's doing. But I think another key piece too is building the right narrative around CDR. And I think that's part of the environmental justice conversation, but also, the broader conversation of how to build these markets well. I think, there is a lot of conflation, which comes to Julio's point, of point source carbon capture and carbon removal. And I think we have an opportunity to ensure that we are building a positive narrative around CDR and the diversity of approaches within it and the opportunities it brings, because I think we're already seeing problems in for DAC being conflated with CCS. And I think we have, a responsibility to ensure that people have the knowledge of understanding these differences. So I think that narrative piece is just so key.
I would add to that people don't really have an understanding generally of what even qualifies or could qualify. So I'm a big fan of carbon mineralization. I'm a big fan of peatland restoration. These are good things to do. Right now, there is no way to get paid doing that. You want to talk about the markets, 45Q does not accept carbon mineralization as a pathway. The low carbon fuel standard doesn't either. Like, the compliance markets have not accepted that. For that matter, the CORSIA standard hasn't done that. For that matter, the ETS hasn't done that. There is a set of markets that exist today where direct air capture maybe has access, maybe doesn't, but the other pathways simply don't. And so we have to start building opportunities for these technology pathways to get paid, because if they do, then they can actually enter the market and do better.
Can you, just a question to kind of build on that, what are you seeing that's working? Who is starting to define? Who is starting to make moves in this market?
So I like to talk about the engineered solutions because they're straightforward, even if they're not necessarily large or loved. We're starting to see a couple of things coming forward which I think have very large potential in tonnage and are clearly removal and could be delivered in a way that is equitable and just. Mineralization is a good example of that. And we're starting to see companies like Heirloom and 4401 that are designed to deliver tonnage in these spaces. And that looks pretty interesting. CarbFix in Iceland is now building a skiff to receive CO2 from around the world, and they're scaling up their own direct air capture project. So there's sort of tonnage that's larval, but is growing. Biohydrogen with CCS is another example of something that's coming on fast. And not only biohydrogen, but just direct bikers, biomass carbon removal, things like Charm Industrial or Running Tide, which are using biomass as a conveyor belt for deep geological storage. That's pretty interesting. Again, not necessarily a compliance mechanism. If you're putting bio oils into disposal wells, that's not the same thing as a qualified oxide under 45Q. But we're starting to see these new technologies beg the question. And in things like the low carbon fuel standard that's being proposed in Washington state, whether or not these things qualify is an active set of discussions. In the California clean fuel standard, the Canadian clean fuel standard, whether or not these things will qualify is an open question. But we're pretty far away from where we need to be. We need to get a lot more options in the compliance market if we want this stuff to scale quickly.
Well, let's say I'm sitting in the audience, I'm hearing this, I'm like vigorously nodding my head. Where would I get involved there, right? Like there's so in some of the other topics we've touched on, there's reports to get into, there's things to read and then go take action on that. If somebody's interested in helping further create a better definition for what carbon removal is, where would they get started? Or is there a place to get started?
So a couple of quick thoughts on this. First of all, by far, the biggest rate limiting step is human capital. Let's start by just getting more people involved. Feel free, jump in. There's companies hiring. Get in there. Join the scrum. There's also a role for everybody. We need lawyers working on this to help set regulations and to help develop frameworks. We need regulators to start developing protocols and standards. If people wanted to go out there and start learning about what might be a good stuff, in addition to the document that we already talked about, the preferred practices document with Microsoft and Carbon Direct, I would encourage people to go to the Oxford Principles. That's a pretty good piece of work in terms of what this stuff should look like. But if people really want to get savvy, they need to really roll up their shoulders. They need to start looking at some of the protocols that the qualifiers have and the certifiers. And they need to start learning about specific verticals. If you don't know anything about carbon mineralization, go out and learn something about it. There's no shortage of literature. I would add, if you wanted to just to get a technical background, Shuchi's boss, Jennifer Wilcox was the primary author on something called the CDR Primer. And you can just go to cdrprimer.org and find a great deal of information there that will help orient your brain.
And I would also say that there are some really interesting lesser known initiatives out there today, such as the Voluntary Carbon Market Integrity Initiative that is launching tomorrow to check out. So go put that into your favorite search engine. And we have Bing, so Bing doesn't quite work as the verb as well as Google does. But in any event, check that one out. And that's sponsored in part by the Children's Investment Fund out of the UK. And it's, I think, a really nice emphasis and focus on quality in the market.
Nice.
I would love to oh, sorry. I would love to add
real quick note, I'm sure people in the audience are looking up these links. If you do, don't be shy. Please post the links as you come with them. There you go, Shuchi.
Thanks, Tito. Yes, please do. And I would love to add too that engage with the public sector. Really, the demand can only come when people think that the population is excited about this. So, I mean, whether that means writing to your congressman or senator, whether that means working in the public sector at a state, local, or national level, we need more expertise and excitement in the government about carbon removal. I think it was a really incredible, moment that Jennifer Wilcox was nominated as acting assistant secretary for the Office of Fossil Energy and Carbon Management. She's, such a deep expert. I have worked in this space, but we need more people who are excited about this, who have technical and policy expertise. Like Julio said, we need lawyers, we need social science experts, we need engagement experts. We need everyone on board, and because we're going to be building this capacity. So I hope that people are excited to work with government.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, I would say we need, and possibly to paraphrase Julio's past comments on another webinar, we need a moonshot for carbon removal. Yes, we need a moonshot for space exploration, and we need a moonshot for, that's questionable, but we need a moonshot for the climate change and clean energy economy overall, but specifically for carbon removal, because it is its own, it's going to require its own massive infrastructure deployment to get going.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Although the DOE parlance these days is for earth shots, not moonshots. And they've announced an earth shot on hydrogen, but there's hopefully they'll announce an earth shot on carbon removal soon. One last thought, Tito, to your earlier question, places where people can go. Liz already mentioned Carbon 180. Carbon 180 is a stellar organization. They got piles of information on this stuff, from the policy to the technology to the markets. There's a new group that's being launched in Europe to do the same thing. CREA, which is an advocacy organization in Europe dedicated to CO2 removal. And so to have that kind of an organization will help, I think, provide facts and galvanize action in a useful way.
Good stuff. I'm zipping through the comments. I'm seeing a good question from this guy, Rob Niven. I think he has something to do with one of these carbon companies. So he's wondering about kind of this idea of how do we protect against diminishing quality in terms of the pursuit of volume. I mean, if you have these three variables, affordability, quality, volume, how do you think about balancing them and ensuring we don't just kind of get really low quality stuff that's high volume?
So I have three terms that I think about in my work all the time: ambition, humility, and money. And you need all of them. In order to maintain the quality, you need to have a higher ambition. That requires things like standards that defend what quality means. You don't just make it up and declare it. You actually have to bring it forward in a way that is robust and defensible and science-based. Humility means you have to understand how difficult developing such things are. You really do need to engage a huge number of people. You need to engage civil society and communities and investors and regulators in order to get this stuff done. And most of us are not experts at all of those. Most of us are experts at one, maybe a couple of those. But you really need to get out of your depth and expertise and work across a great sector and be humble about what you think you can do and how you can do it. And the last thing is you just need money. If you want to maintain quality, then you're going to be paying more than $2 a ton. That's the punchline. $2 a ton is not CO2 removal. That is snake oil. That's panacea. And we know the real costs of these things, and they're more. And part of the reason we know is that we did our diligence and made the investments. And some of it is on the order of $10, some of it's on the order of $200. But I'm sorry to say that it doesn't actually grow on trees. We need to be very careful about how we manage this stuff. And you have to know going in that price is something that you need to pay for if you want quality.
Nice. That opens up a question for Liz, actually, from James Temple on, how has Microsoft adjusted its views on price it's willing to pay? Initially, you were looking at, it sounds like $20 a ton. How's that changed?
Yeah, and I will, before I will answer that, and before I do, I'll say, piggybacking on Julio's comment about what we need for the market. We actually at Microsoft, we just talk about, we need contracts. We need to have carbon removal under contract. The plant developers need carbon removal under contract. They need the same thing. And then the standards bodies, I would also argue, need the terms and the conditions in the contract, durability, leakage, additionality, all of those things. Those contracts are what are sort of the glue of this market. They're the widgets of the market. And so for us, it's really, how do we, it took us by surprise how much our RFP made a splash last year. But at the end of the day, I think it's fundamentally about that. The contracts are what we need to get going. In answer to James's great question, which we've certainly been asked before, we have a carbon fee. We have an internal carbon fee that we've had since 2012 of $15 a ton. And that was based on what we knew we needed to pay for renewable energy. And there's a lot more of a webinar we could have on our carbon fee and how we structure it. I'll spare you that for now, maybe save that for another day. But really, what we found from our carbon fee was that we could pay roughly $20 a ton on average for our whole portfolio, based on budget, spending less in other areas and so on, balancing our portfolio. And so really, that comment that Lucas had made was what we know to be. We knew we could pay for in this moment in time. We're very aware now, from having waded into this market, that the theoretical floor price of direct air capture, for example, is way higher than that. And so we know that money is going to have to come from somewhere. And we're still figuring that out. We're working on how to make that work. But I think as we, as this market scales, it's going to have to do so on the back of corporates who are willing to pay more.
Beautiful. I'd like to note about contracts. It makes me think of, we've been working a lot with startups through Airmire's Launchpad, and Y Combinator created this thing called a SAFE a while back that was a simple agreement of future equity. And I wonder if there's an opportunity emerging for, at least at the startup level, some kind of SAFE agreement for future carbon, or any comments there on like what might be a step in the right direction to simplify contracts, or or maybe not even simplify, to get more contracts created.
So let me talk just a little bit about this in the context of some of the other questions that come in. Right now in Carbonville, we are entering a world of contract breach. There's a whole bunch of carbon that's been contracted that has literally gone up in smoke in Oregon, in California, and other places. And we don't know what happens after that. Like, it's not actually clear how that gets fixed. One of the things that has begun to happen actually is that we know that we have to buy carbon on a forward basis, and we need to actually ensure long duration storage in natural systems and stuff like that. And so people are getting smarter about how those systems are managed and how the contracts are made. But I think it's premature to believe that we can do that today. We need more experience. We need more science. We needed more exposure to these systems in order to really understand, in some cases, what that contracts look like. It's part of the reason that something like, biohydrogen with CCS or direct air capture is interesting, is because there the contracting is real easy. Like, there's just it's kind of bulletproof, but there's not the tons there. The tons are in the ecosystems. And so we have to sort of manage these different contractual realms. One of the most important recognitions, if your audience gets nothing else out of today's discussion, I want them to get this. All tons are not created equal. They have different durability. They have different risks. They have different return rates. A tree is not a rock. And we shouldn't think about contracting them or managing them in the same way. And so as this market evolves, this isn't going to be just a simple commodity market where all tons are traded equally. Like, there's going to be a difference between leasing and renting and buying in this realm.
I love it. If you had to just to put a point on it, if you had to think about a future carbon marketplace like the NASDAQ or something, there's roughly 2,000 or 3,000 companies listed on the NASDAQ. When you think about a future carbon removal marketplace, how many, I guess, suppliers? How you say, you know, a tree is not a rock. How many suppliers are there? How many? Yeah.
I think there's thousands of suppliers. Probably many thousands or even tens of thousands of suppliers. Even on direct air capture, Shell, Royal Dutch Shell, moves about 300 million tons of stuff a year. So if you just wanted to do 10 gigatons with direct air capture, you would need 30 companies the size of Shell. Like, that's just the math. There's nothing beyond that. And in fact, for the people who manage forests, for the people who plant mangroves and manage those ecosystems, for the farmers who are picking up soils and are arbitraging that through blockchains, like there's going to be many thousands of suppliers. And they have, and whoever's a buyer on a commodity market needs to know that what they're buying is actual CO2 removal. We've been sort of sidelined in this discussion to talk about ancillary benefits, ecosystem preservation, biodiversity, water, all these things are good. But if you're contracting for carbon, you better get the carbon.
Well said. Shuchi, I'm thinking about the massive scale of this that Julio is talking about. Where does your mind go in terms of equity, in terms of justice, in terms of what this carbon removal marketplace of the future looks like?
Yeah, it's a little intimidating, right? The size of this market that we need is going to need to be so huge, but I think there's just a really amazing opportunity. We are not putting enough money into carbon removal, as everyone here well knows. I think we're making exciting steps, and I think, you know, the infrastructure package would be a huge step forward, but we need billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in this market to make it feasible. And I think what that really means is that we have a lot more communities that have opportunities to participate in getting the benefits of that money, right? I think, you know, there are so many communities that not only would get the benefit of, you know, having jobs and having this new industry in their space, I think addressing a lot of the other concerns of frontline communities that they might not know carbon removal addresses. Like, for example, I mean, DAC is basically a giant air purifier. Why not talk about the benefits of cleaner air alongside the climate that we are improving? Because air pollution has been a huge problem for these communities, and they deeply care about them. So I think we need to go to them on their terms and talk about these benefits. Because I think building out this kind of market is going to take all of us, especially, you know, the communities that have been disempowered before. And so I think, you know, looking at even different kinds of pollution like mine tailings, we have the opportunity to actually remediate not just the pollution from the mines, but also to, you know, remove CO2 with that waste, and potentially even create a value-added product that can be synthetic aggregate for concrete to even, you know, contribute to, you know, a market. And so it's those benefits that, you know, I mean, as Julio said, that you should absolutely ensure that you are getting the carbon, but I think really leaning into these other benefits that we have as we start to build this out is going to be really important as we start engaging with communities.
Yeah, I love that. We're coming up to the close, so I want to just ask one final question, and it leads to, I mean, the reason that you're all part of this panel is ostensibly you're experts, you know everything about carbon removal, you're at the forefront. But what that really means is that you're curious, that you change, that you adapt. And that's something that I want to make sure comes across here, is that you all are continuously adapting, continuously shaking your heads at something that did not freaking work like you thought it would. What's something in the last year that you've changed your mind on, that you're just like, wow, totally got that wrong, or totally got that different? I'd love to hear if anybody has any ideas there.
I can start by saying that when I joined Microsoft 5 years ago, I joined from the climate activist community, and I was a real skeptic about carbon offsets overall. I think there were good reasons to have a healthy skepticism, and I was even more so about carbon removal. And so that has been a real growth curve for me. I would not say that I came in as an expert on carbon removal. I just put on my learning hat, put on my growth mindset, and just got tenacious about reading and absorbing and learning and chasing the ball down the field.
I love that. Wow. Thank you.
For me, the big learning was how the surprise that I've seen is how rapidly demand has outstripped supply. And with that, effectively, the role of project developers in this space. Boy, if there's one part of the ecosystem we're super weak on, it is good project developers. And a good project developer that's a serious skill set, right? Those guys don't grow on trees either. And we need people who are experienced on managing people and managing capital and getting that stuff up, and it takes time. My concern that comes from that is actually that we will modify the standards to get the cheap and easy stuff that is not actually carbon valid because we don't have enough good projects. It's my sincere hope that we don't. But we're starting to see, as the compliance markets grow, we're starting to see more projects entering the market, and boy, we need a whole lot more of that more quickly.
Talk a little bit more about change. What did you think was going to happen when so demand is massively outstripping supply? Mm-hmm. Going back a year, what were you thinking before?
Well, so my initial conception of how this would work is you get somebody like Oprah Winfrey to talk about CO2 removal, and then the next thing you know, there's a zillion people on apps buying CO2 removal, and the projects just magically appear, right? And then there's enough money and enough demand to make it work. And that was false. I was just wrong. And that's not just true for direct air capture. That's true for all of it. And that's the part of the humility that I was talking about before. Walking into a working mine and saying, let's do CO2 removal is a complex proposition. Going into an area that has been deforested and saying, we want to add a forest here, going to marginal lands in Ghana and growing a new forest, it is, I'll give you just one little experience from Carbon Direct. We had a project that we're doing, we really like with this one company where they're replanting a forest in Spain. The forest was destroyed by fire. And the ground was so badly damaged that something wouldn't grow on its own. It was clearly additionally had to add a forest where there wasn't going to be a forest. They went in, they planted a bunch of seedlings, everything was on target, and then wild pigs came in and ate all the seedlings. Forest gone. Start again. These kinds of things are going to keep hitting us, where there's like, oh, I didn't expect boars to eat the forest, but they did. And if you're a project manager and a developer, like these things happen and you need to be humble about what it means. And if you're buying, you need to be tolerant of these kinds of learnings in order to allow the whole ecosystem to thrive.
I love it. I love the delta. I love the before and the after. Thank you for sharing that as well. Shuchi.
Yeah, I would say I think the thing that has surprised me the most in the last 6 months is how quickly the government can pivot and the power of that. I would say this is, I mean, obviously a different administration is going to have, a lot of momentum and a lot of excitement, but the things that we have been able to do in the last 6 months and the things that we are planning for the next 6 months, I think will deeply affect this market in a positive way. And it's been such an honor to be able to be part of that rapid change. And it's just been really astounding to see how dedicated and quickly people are wanting to work on carbon removal. And I think it's just going to be a really exciting 4 years.
That's right. All right. Cheers to that. Thank you all for everything that you do. And thank you to everybody's listening in. I mean, hope to see you here next time this panel happens. Maybe you're going to be the one kind of shaking your head and saying, actually, you know what? Here's something that changed. Here's something that we learned. So humility, as Julio said, is key there. Thank you everybody for being a part of that. And thanks for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Can we go home now?
Au revoir. Liz, I owe you a note. I'll send you something before the end of the day.
Take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks,
See you, Liz.
Thanks, Tito.